Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching by Rabbi Rebecca Schatz.
For those of us who are staying in touch with everything that's going on in Israel, this was an extremely difficult week. And what I was just thinking about during the Haftorah is that if Shabbat hadn't happened today, they would still be in Shiva for the 6 hostages who were executed. And today is also the 11th month since October 7th, and therefore families who lost people who are Jewish, who lost people on October 7th, are actually finishing Shiva as well today. Or finishing their period of mourning, not Shiva, but finishing their year, so to speak. So today's a tough day. Today is a day that marks loss in really 2 categories. One, shorter period of time, but for many of us, that much more impactful because it's been 11 months since October 7th, and because we all came to feel as though we knew, especially Hirsch, but also many of the names of the people who were murdered this past week. And also because at the end of 11 months, for those of us who have ever sat Shiva for someone before, our lives change in a very different rhythm. All of a sudden, we're not saying Kaddish every day. There are not so many rules that change, but definitely the world changes in terms of if you were going to minyan every day, you might not be anymore. The way in which we interact with family and the way that we might come to see people as regularly, it probably isn't happening as much after the 11 months. And also just really crazy and sad to think that it's been 11 months and that we've hit this mark. So this was a tough parsha to teach on what has happened this past week and what has happened really in the past 11 months. And so I decided I want to take a different avenue. We're still going to talk about the parsha, but I'm going to hold this space, and I hope that we will all learn together as if this is actually Shiva, as if we are in a space where, even though we don't sit Shiva on Shabbat, that we are going to learn Torah in the memory of these people, but also through their legacy. So when I prepare for a Shiva, I think about the person, I think about the relationship they've either had to me or to their family member who I know, and then I teach Torah about them. Shiva, as we all know, is for the living. It's not for the dead. The person who has died has died. Shiva is to comfort those who are still alive. So in many ways, and what we're going to do right now is about those who were murdered, and in their name, and hopefully to propel their legacy, but very much actually for all of us and for their families, of course, who are living with this reality of continuing to live when their loved ones have been killed. So we're not going to look at tzedek tirdof. We're not going to look at eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. Those are all things that I'm sure there are other rabbis in this world who are talking about this week. I didn't feel that they were comprehensive or appropriate to talk about this week. But I want us to recognize that there are other ways of looking at the Torah and also looking at this time of year. So we're going to look at a verse in our Torah portion and also at the idea of Elul, which we just started this past week. So I'm going to pass these around. There's probably one for every 2 people, I would get. Maybe one for everybody. Well, you can try. We can see how far they get around. Okay, so the verse that we're going to look at, I hope not many of you actually know very well. I'm hoping that this is going to be a new verse for many of us. It's actually 2 verses, one of which will have more commentaries than the other. But this is a verse that talks about when you appoint a leader, that this leader should have for themselves a Torah. That doesn't mean this Torah, right? It doesn't mean a scroll that you take from somewhere. By the way, this past week, I took one of these Torah scrolls for our new ark to make sure that it fit. It's coming. It's almost here. It's not here yet, but it's coming. And it's beautiful, and it'll be here soon-ish. The idea is not that they hold on to a Torah scroll that we all have, but that they actually have their own Torah scroll. And we're going to see later on that that is not just a concept for royalty. It's also a concept for each one of us. That we're actually each supposed to also have our own Torah scrolls that we hold with us in moments of decision making. So we're going to read these verses, and then I want to hear your thoughts on where this is important, especially in today's world, especially in a world in which we can feel overwhelmed and not know which way is up. How is this a verse that's helpful to us? When the king, and I specifically kept it in its correct translation and didn't make the gender neutral so that we could understand who they were talking about. When the king is seated on his royal throne and written for him a copy of his Torah from before the priests and Levites. It's really terrible English. But what it's saying in Hebrew is that when a king is sitting on his chair, Kiseh Mamlachto, his chair of royalty, and there has been written for him. It's not clear yet from this verse who did the writing, but it has been written for him, Mishneh HaTorah. Where have we heard Mishneh Torah before? Huh? Rambam, exactly. The Rambam's work work is the Mishneh Torah. Now, that's not what they're talking about here. The Mishneh Torah hadn't been written yet when Deuteronomy was codified. But they're talking about Mishneh Torah, which means a second Torah, or a copy of Torah, or a Torah you can learn from. Mishneh can mean all those different things. But it says Hazot. It's very specific. Al Sefer Milifnei HaKohanim ve'Aleviim, that somehow the priests and the Levites had something to do with. Let it remain with him, and let him read in it all his life. It's a very important distinction. Read in it, not read it in. Right? So to actually see his own life within it, to continue to go back to it and be able to see his life reflected through it. Leman yilmad le'yireh et Adonai Elohav lishmor et kol divrei haTorah hazot. So that you can learn to revere, to respect, to fear God, to observe faithfully every word of this Torah, et hachukim ha'ele la'asotam, so that you'll then end up actually doing the laws. So if you understand them, then you will also do them. Okay. How are these verses helpful to us, interesting to us, given the preamble that I gave before? How might this be connected to our world today?
Can you ask the question again?
How are these verses connected to a way in which we can navigate the world that we are currently in? Having our own Torah, having something that we have that we see our life through. Any thoughts? Yeah, John.
In the context of what we've experienced as a community for the past 11 months,
Yeah.
there are all these different narratives that
Great.
folks are imposing.
Great.
We need to hold fast to the ones that we know are true.
Great, beautiful. So sometimes writing our own story means reflecting to ourselves, but also to the outside. This is the narrative that I am holding on to. There are lots of stories, lots of narratives, lots of descriptions. This is the one that I need to hold on for myself, whether because that's self-preservation, right, of understanding what's going on, or because you believe that is true, right, that is something that needs to be held on to be able to navigate your own moral compass. Other thoughts? What are these verses telling us? Yeah, go ahead, sir.
It refers to presidents, prime ministers.
Okay.
Are in charge.
Great. And so what is it saying? What do you think? How are these verses kind of helping that along?
Well, in this situation, instead of the king, now it's prime minister of Israel.
I see. Okay, so making the connection that leaders, right, whether it's prime ministers, presidents, heads of boards, right, like whoever it is, that the people in charge should have a sense of what that Torah is for them so that they can hold by it, so that they can continue to live by it as well. Was there another, Larry, was your hand?
Just similar to John, these are times or years where I feel knocked off our axes.
Yeah.
And it's hard to, for me, there's a desire to get in some kind of anchor.
Great.
And maybe this is implying something like that. It's hard to come back.
Great. So we might not really know where we are in the world. We might not know who to listen to or what to do or which axes for us to fall back on. And so this can be an anchor for that. This can be a way for us to recognize this is what I'm going to come back to. This is my foundation. This is the way that I'm going to understand what's going on in the world. And interestingly, Larry didn't say this, but I'm going to add on to it, that the second verse that we read seems to imply that not only should you find it, but you should actually write it for yourself, right? That it shouldn't just be something that you find that moral compass, but rather you also create that moral compass to be something that you're reflecting your life out of and into. Other thoughts, comments? We'll go on to a few commentaries in a second. Okay. So Rashi says about the first verse that we read, that this idea of writing him, et Mishneh HaTorah, that there are two scrolls of the law, that Mishneh here means two, not the learning of, but actually two Torahs, one that is placed in his treasury and the other that goes out and comes in with him. So this is the idea here, is that you would have a Torah that sits, in an ark and is here all the time. If you work in a synagogue, there are Torahs always around. But that you also have with you some kind of, as Larry used the term, moral compass, right? That you have with you something written that can be a way to check yourself and say, this is my Torah. This is the Torah that I'm falling back on. And you have it with you always, right? It's something that you don't just open up when you're in synagogue, but that you have it with you when you're walking down the street and see someone in need and you think to yourself, wow, this book that's in my hand, you might not even have to open it, but this thing that I have is reminding me that I should be taking care of that person as well. Does anybody in this room carry with them like a Sidur or Tfilat Haderech or like a Psalms book in their purse just to like have it? Yeah, so you're not opening it, right? Some of us have it so that if we end up somewhere with that bag and we don't have access to a Sidur, we then have one. But some of us also just keep it with us because it feels good to have a part of our tradition with us at all times, right? Some people wear a little necklace with the Shema in it, same kind of thing. That we should have something with us that is a recognizable sign, and that we can be reminded that this is something that we should hold by. Okay. Yeah, Isaac.
This literally resonates. The picture I got a couple of days ago from my cousin who is a soldier in Gaza.
Okay.
And he's in charge of making the Torah.
Oh.
And they have another person because of Elul. He plays the shofar.
Yeah.
And they actually are making this Torah
Yeah.
in Gaza.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. It's when I was in Israel in November, we went to the rabbinic army base, and it's the army base where they check all of those Torahs to then send them out to all the places that they need to go where people are fighting, because this is exactly right, that even in moments of war, and I can promise you that not everybody is reading Torah on Mondays and Thursdays while they're fighting, and they have it with them. It's a reminder that while you're doing everything you're doing, that there is a code to be following such that you understand the tradition behind you. So that's I'm glad it was relevant to you. Okay. Sanhedrin. So as you can see in the Rashi commentary, there are parentheses that say that this comes from Sanhedrin, which is a Talmud Masechet, a section of Talmud. And this is what it says. The king writes himself a Torah for his sake. Right? So this isn't just a Torah scroll that you buy or that you have a sofer write for you, but this is a Torah that you're actually writing for yourself. The question that I have is, okay, well then is it that Torah, right? Is it the same stories, or is it my Torah? Is it stories that I would write? Is it stories that I would choose to emphasize more and others that I would choose to leave out? I don't know. When he goes out to war, here you go, Isaac, he brings it out with him. Right? So this is something that goes with you in all moments. When he comes in from war, he brings it in with him. When he sits in judgment, it is with him. When he reclines to eat, it is opposite him. I love that the rabbis make sure to say, like, don't get food on it. Like, put it across from you, right? You messy eaters, don't have it near you. And it shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life. And then Rava says, even if his fathers left him a Sefer Torah, he has the obligation to write his own. Because of the proof text that says, now write this song for yourselves. What the rabbis are doing here, centuries later, after this is written in our Torah, what the rabbis are saying to us is, it's not good enough to just have this Torah, or to have a Torah even passed down to you that might not be this exact one, but that is a Torah that you've seen before. Each and every person must understand what is the Torah that they need to hold on to keep with them. And so they must write it. Does anybody have any comments about this Sanhedrin piece, about the coming in and the taking out and the going in and the bringing in, bringing out? Yeah, Bonnie.
Well, I don't know if it's exactly relevant, but after Larry passed away, my grandson gave me a book of very many quotes
Yeah.
from all parts of Jewish literature.
Yeah.
And then you were supposed to reflect on it
Right.
and write it yourself.
Right.
And so I spent a year doing that.
Yeah.
And it was extremely powerful.
Right. And I think first of all, I remember you doing that, and I remember it being a powerful experience. And I think that's exactly what they're getting at here, which is that it doesn't have to be that you write a whole brand new Torah, but it needs to be the way in which the Torah is speaking to you. It needs to be the way in which you are reflecting in and out this Torah that has meant something to you and how it's helping you, or sometimes how it's challenging you, right? That's also important. So having that practice every day is something that then people can hold on to as a comfort. Anything else? Yeah.
It also makes me question the metaphor about the life well lived and the Torah scroll pressure upon our heart.
Yeah.
The glory we show the world.
Beautiful.
Our actions and our deeds.
Beautiful. Yeah, that there's like some kind of reciprocity, even though the Torah, we think of the Torah as a living thing, but we also know that the Torah is a stagnant object, right? Until you bring it to life and continue to live with it. The thing that I was struck by is this idea of coming in from anywhere. Here they're using war, but when you go out to war, you take it with you, and then when you come in from war, you bring it back with you. That seems to imply that, like we're just talking about right now with this living organism, that seems to imply that the Torah might change, right? That when you are out at war, the Torah might be one thing for you, but that this personal Torah, when you bring it back into your home after war, is going to be a very different Torah. Right? And again, they're using Torah, but we can use Bonnie's example. When you're living with a partner, Torah looks very different than when you're grieving that partner, right? Or maybe it's that you were living elsewhere in the world and now you've come to somewhere else. Things are going to look different if we allow them to be alive and we allow them to reflect that which we are going through in our lives. Yeah, Paula.
So, Rabbi Laura Geller,
Yeah.
many years ago, and it still stays with me, talked about our own personal Torah.
Yeah.
In a women's commentary on the Torah.
Yeah.
Because, the text is so real.
Sure.
But what's your Torah?
Yeah.
And then when I used to coordinate the drashot, I had Rabbi Arntzen do a training on how do you give a drash.
Yeah.
And he's like, what is the Torah speaking to you?
Right.
And that's what you should be conveying.
Yeah.
So this whole idea is personal Torah.
Yeah.
Very individual, but it's in the collective.
Yeah.
It's one that we all have.
Right.
Because initially it was like, wait, Mr. President, you don't get to decide what the rules are
Right.
by yourself.
Right.
It fits you today.
Sure.
Because this is our collective.
Yeah, great. And I think that's part of what we are to understand from this idea of this being our Torah is that for those of us who are in the business of commenting on Torah all the time, I see Mishpatim very different this year than I did last year. It's the same exact parsha, but my life has changed, the world has changed, and so I reflect back on it differently. And I think it's interesting that you had Rabbi Arntzen, because Rabbi Artzen's whole theology, is process theology, that God also changes with you as you change. That it's not just Torah and the words of our of our life being reflected back to us in different ways, but also our actual relationship with God, that God is changing as we are changing, to be in that constant relationship. So it's interesting that you brought him up, because I was thinking about that as a good comparison. These two commentaries at the bottom here, Ibn Ezra says that this Mishneh, right, this copy, he's translated it as copy, means that it's a second rendition, that it literally isn't that Torah, right? That it has to be a different kind of Torah. That's why the Rambam wrote his work, Mishneh Torah, right? Because it was supposed to be an accompanying guide to the Torah, and so it's supposed to be this like second rendition, second copy of Torah. But what Ibn Ezra is saying is no, this literally was a second Torah. This was not one Torah that you were just copying again with different handwriting. This was a second Torah. The Rashbam says, and I think this is very, very powerful, because no one in this room, not one person in this room, and I am very much included, understand every single word of our Torah, right? There's no way to, there's no comprehension high enough to be able to gain every single ounce of knowledge from our Torah, which was what makes it such a dynamic thing to learn from. Excuse me. Rashbam says the king would have to have a version of the Torah which a lay person could understand. So this second Torah should not just be one that you understand and that is giving you life, literally, but this should be a second Torah that if someone came to you and said, I need assistance, or I need guidance, or I want to understand X, that this Torah that you have here, that you keep with you all the time, is a Torah that people who read from it can actually understand, oh, that's how I should do whatever it is I'm looking for guidance on. So not a high level, the Torah, but rather a lay person's guide to life and Torah, to life and being able to guide one's life also by that Torah. Turn the page over. In just a second, we're gonna switch gears, but I just we're not gonna read this one on the top from the Mishneh Torah, but just so you get a sense, there is an actual mitzvah in our Torah. It's the last mitzvah of our 613 mitzvot. The 613th mitzvah is to write your own scroll. Now, those of you who have participated in writing a letter in a Torah or writing a word in a Torah with a sofer's help, you do that because that is you accomplishing that mitzvah. One letter, one word is as if you've written a Torah in the sense of sofrut, in the sense of writing a Torah like this. But what the mitzvah is saying to each one of us is that you don't have to be a king, you don't have to be a queen, you don't have to be royalty of any kind, but it is important that you have some kind of Torah that reflects your life and that you write it. This comes up when we're gonna look at this a little bit in a second. This comes up especially in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur theology, right? Because we are hoping that God is writing our names, but we also have to actively write our names into the book of life, right? So this idea of writing something, writing your life, writing this Torah so that you can live by it, is something that we're supposed to hold to be a moral compass, to understand our lives, maybe to pass on legacy, right? That's what a lot of this Torah does for us, to pass on stories that allow us to understand life better in the moments that we encountered those stories, etc. So that's the piece of Torah that I want to teach from this parsha. The way I wanted to connect it to the world, and especially to the past week that we've had, is the fact that it is very clear for us from the beginning that Torah in our lives is not perfect. That Torah is also broken. And how do we know that? We know that because we are told, and you have this verse in front of you. This is the second time this verse is given to us, but this is where the commentary is. So this is the verse I gave you. We are told that when we have an Ark of Covenant, then not only does the perfect scroll or the perfect tablets go into that Ark, but also the broken ones. Because it's important for the Torah that we write for ourselves to remember that we aren't just whole. that we are also broken. And that, to me, right now, is so much of what's going on in this world. That there are aspects, especially of this past week, but also of the past 11 months, where we have to hold, especially those of us in this room and living in America and not actively in parts of the world where this is much more obvious, but we have to hold those things that are broken while also holding the parts of us that need to remain whole. And that's what the ark is supposed to do. It's supposed to remind us of both of those things. You can be whole and you can also be broken at the same time. And not only can you be, but it's important to recognize that you are. So Deuteronomy says, God said to me, meaning Moshe, carve out 2 tablets of stone like the first, right? Interesting that the wording here is very similar to this second Torah, and come up to God on the mountain and make an ark of wood. I will inscribe on the tablets the commandments that were on the first tablets that you smashed, and you shall deposit them into the ark. Don't get rid of them. Put them in the ark. Elul, this month that we just started, has 3 significant and 4 less significant, one of which we'll see in a second, acronyms to describe why Elul. Why is this a month that needs to have more attention paid to it than other months that we have in our year? The most famous one is Ani ledodi v'dodi li. I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine. The Aleph, Lamed, Vav, and Lamed at the beginning of each one of those words then spells the month Elul. People really like that. Lots of people get married at this time of year. It works very nicely. There are others that I didn't bring for you today that remind us of Teshuvah, Tefillah, and Tzedakah. That there are ways in which we engage with our community and with ourselves in the act of doing Teshuvah, doing repentance, of prayer, of Tefillah, of making our spiritual lives higher, and Tzedakah, of taking care of our community. And then there's this one. This is from Bava Batra. This is from the Gemara, and it says, Asher nikra Shem Adonai Tzvaot Yoshev hakruvim elav. There's this phrase, the name, and it says it the name twice, of God. And why is this? Why are we using this phrase? This is coming out of the Gemara, so it's coming out of a story. So there's not so much context, but just go with me here. Melamed sheluchot v'shivrei luchot munachim ba'aron. So the reason that this phrase says the name of God teaches that both, because Shem, right there, Shem is twice, so both. That both the second tablets and the broken pieces of the first are placed in the ark. And then right below that, you can see that they rearrange the words, so that you can see that they spell Elul. That during this month of Elul, we should recognize that as we are working on ourselves, that we are working on the parts of us that are whole, and we are also working on the parts of us that are broken, but not to make the broken parts whole, right? To recognize those broken parts and to know how to live with them such that our whole selves can be ready for other broken parts that are going to come our way. My friend and former intern in this space, actually, Rabbi Adir Yolkut, wrote a really beautiful drash on this week's Parsha, given the world. And I wanted to read this piece to you. He came to discover that this brokenness, right, of having these two different types of tablets reminded him of the blessing that we actually say before the Torah. And that there's this moment of why is there planting, right? Why are we talking about the Chaye Olam Nata Betochenu, right? Nata, that word means to plant. So why is it that our lives are now planted into something? And this is what the Sfat Emet, this is not what Adir said, Rabbi Yolkut said, this is what the Sfat Emet says. Within every Jewish person, there is a sacred point in their heart. This is what it means when it says eternal life planted within us, Chaye Olam Nata Betochenu. Throughout the whole year, our attachments to physicality obscure that point. That is why on Rosh Hashanah, we invoke the language of asking God to inscribe us for life. When we received the Torah, we were on the level such that we never be erased from this writing. But because of our missing the mark, we lost this ability. Our job is then to renew this life within us every year. The sealing that we seek on Rosh Hashanah is to not let this life force within each Jewish person get lost throughout the year. And before I read his words, which we'll end with, this is why I think it's important to teach this Torah of holding our own Torah with us throughout these difficult moments. Because we need to understand what is that point for us. What is our moral compass? How do we recognize how we can get back onto those axes that we've wanted to get back to, and the chaos of the world and the cacophony of noise is not allowing us to do so? How do we get back to that? We write for ourselves what our moral compass is and how to continue to follow it. So this is what Rabbi Yolkut says. I think that's what I was feeling as I mourned these people who were so similar and yet on a core level different. Hirsch, Carmel, Eden, Alex, Ori, and Almog were my people. When they died, that Nekuda Kadosha, that obscure holy point, that sacred point was snuffed out. If all of our points are connected, then mine felt that way too. I hope that we can recognize that weeks like this one are weeks for us to dig more deeply into why we feel the way that we do when this happens to anyone, any people, but especially those who we feel we know deeply and are praying for and are hoping for. And that we are able to recognize that part of what is happening in the world right now is that people are trying to figure out how to write their own Torah. And they're trying to figure out, what does it mean for us to hold on to hope? For us to still recognize that there is pain in the world, even after this has happened. This didn't end anything. This was just a blip in time. And how do we continue to hold these people's memories as many people are saying, right, for a revolution, as a way of us recognizing what power can come with memory and with sorrow, but also to recognize that it's on us. It's on us to feel responsible, to have responsibility to one another, to humanity, to make sure that we are holding all of these pieces together. So as I know we are all holding both broken pieces and whole pieces of ourselves this week and for the past 11 months, I hope that as we're entering into Elul, we can all figure out what does it mean to write our own Torah and to be able to center back in on that point that's going to allow us to begin a year in health and in peace and in love, but all the more so also to feeling whole in ourselves.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.